Welcome. And our bracha, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. And here we are. So where we are right now, we're in Parshat Pinchas. That's the Parsha for this coming week. We just started, as you can see, this is verse 2. We just started a new chapter which deals with inheritance and the daughters of Tzlofchad. And it's such an interesting passage because I believe this is an example of oral Torah that is written into the written Torah, which supports the notion of oral Torah along with this written Torah. And the reason partially is that we have to have an oral Torah if we're going to believe that the Torah is more than simply idealism, that the oral Torah is what allows the written Torah to not just be idealistic, but to actually be practiced. And that is a profound moment, a profound issue, because when you take ideals and ideas and you try to actually put them into practice, all kinds of issues arise that have to be dealt with, that one simply cannot anticipate when you set down the basic laws and the basic propositions. But the notion that religion and our religion is more than just simply being idealistic, but is actually an attempt to put those ideals into practice is what requires an oral law. So we have these 5 daughters of Tzlofchad, V'ta'amodna lifnei Moshe, and they come before Moses, v'lifnei Elazar HaKohen, and before Elazar HaKohen. It's Elazar HaKohen and not Aaron, because Aaron has already died. He died back in Parshat Chukat last week when we read about it. V'lifnei HaNesiim, and before the heads of the tribes, we'll call them princes, v'chol ha'edah, and the entire community. So they came to, I imagine you might say, the highest court involved here. Petach Ohel Moed, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, Lamor, saying. And so what is going to follow is going to be a quote as to the case they were pleading. So, Rashi, Lifnei Moshe Velifnei Elazar, before Moses and before Elazar. Magid, this implies, Shelo Amdu Lifneihem Ella Bishnat Ha'arbaim. This tells you that this whole thing didn't happen except in the 40th year, Achar Shemet Aharon, after Aaron had passed away, because we know that Aaron passed away in that 40th year, and had he been alive, it would have mentioned Aaron and not Elazar. Lifnei Moshe, before Moses. V'achar kach lifnei Elazar, and after that it mentions, and before Elazar. So there's a difficulty with this. What's the difficulty? If Shar im Moshe lo yada, is it possible that if Moses could not figure out the case, Elazar Yodea, that Elazar would be able to figure out the case? I mean, who was more knowledgeable? Who was more understanding? Who had the greater experience, right? Ela Sares Hamikra V'darshehu Divrei Rabbi Yoshaya. But what you need to do is simply rearrange the order of the verse so that it says Lifnei Lifnei Elazar, and then it says Lifnei Moshe. That's the way Rabbi Yoshaya says you need to understand this verse. You need to just rearrange it. Abba Hanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar Omer. However, Abba Hanan, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, says, Beveit HaMidrash Hayu Yoshvim, They were meeting, gathering in the Beit Hamidrash, the house of study, v'amdu lifnei kulam, and it's simply that the daughters of Tzlachad were standing before everyone, that the order of people, Moses, Elazar, etc., is simply to tell you that they were organized. They were sitting in an organized place. And when it says they stood, that is to say, the daughters of Tzlavchad, that they stood in front of them all. And as I said before, the reason why it's specified in the way that it does is because that's the way in which people would have been seated in a Bet Midrash. Next, this is what they said: Avinu meit bamidbar. Our father died in the wilderness. והוא לא היה בתוך העדה הנועדים על השם, but he was not one of the people in the congregation who murmured against God, ba'adat Korach, in, again, the congregation of Korach, two different situations, but, in this case, bechet omet, he died on his own for his own sins. That's essentially what this means. Uvanim lo hayulo, and he had no sons. He left no sons, right? The understanding is that we die. The reason why we're mortal is that essentially we commit enough trespasses that at some point we're going to lose our lives. We're not entitled to them. And he was not one of the people who were murmuring against God. We know about these situations, lots of examples in the book of Numbers. We also read recently about Korach. So he was not one of those people. He died in the natural course of events, right? Vahu lo haya, etc., and he was not, etc. And this is quoting Baba Batra, the tractate Baba Batra. It's mentioned up here, and this is on page 118, and also in the Sifrei, which is a commentary on the book of Numbers and the book of Deuteronomy. Lefi shayu ba'ot lomar, because they were going to mention bechet omet, that he died in the natural course of events in the wilderness. Niskaku lomar, they needed to say lo bechet mit lonanim, that he did not die on account of the sin of the murmurers, of people who murmurs. Velo ba'adat Korach, nor did he die as part of the congregation of Korach, Shehitzu al HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who incited that congregation, incited others against God. Ela bechet olevado omet, but he died for his own unique sins. Velo hechti et acherim, and he didn't cause others to sin, imo, with him. And this is from the tractate Shabbat. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Mekoshesh etzim haya, he was the fellow mentioned regarding gathering sticks on Shabbat. That's Rabbi Akiva. So he is trying to come up with, Rabbi Akiva is trying to come up with a unique sin, right? That might have been a capital offense. For Rabbi Shimon Omer, but Rabbi Shimon says, Min hama'apilim haya. He was one of those people who, after the spies had come back and told them that they were not going to be able to conquer the land of Israel, and they all wanted to turn back to Egypt, and they started to do that, and then the presence of the Lord appeared and basically told them that they were going to die in the wilderness, etc., and there were people who felt bad that what they'd done. They felt, oh my gosh, we made a big mistake, and they tried to forcibly enter the land of Canaan, and Moses warned them. He said, look, it's done. Don't push against it. So the Ma'apilim are the people who were the group of people who tried to gain entry to the land of Israel, to the land of Canaan, after they had already had to receive the edict of wandering in the desert. So ki ein lo ben, because he had no son. Ha'im haya lo ben. So the point is this: that's the reason we're coming to you. Okay, let's make sure. No. Sorry, we're finished. Let's go to the next verse. Lama yigara shem avinu mitoch mishpachto. Why should the name of our father be removed or lost or diminished, yigara, mitoch mishpachto, from the midst of his family? Ki ein lo ben, because on account of the fact that he doesn't have a son. Tna lanu achuza, give us a holding, an inheritance, a holding, betoch amongst achei avinu, amongst our father's brothers. So interesting, right? So this is why it's a circumstance that is propelling this particular case, that under normal circumstances, the inheritance goes through the male line, but here we don't have one. What do we do? So, Lama Yigara Shem Avinu. Why should our father's name be removed? Anu b'makom bem omdot. We stand in the place of a son. Ve'im hein hanekevot chashuvot zera zera. But if in fact females are not considered to be literally it means seed, but what I think it means is, that male offspring here, that they don't count as gaining inheritance. Tityabem imanu liovem. Let our mother, right, perform a levirate marriage. Let her marry one of our father's surviving brothers. And we know about that law. So when it says zera, I think it means in seed, meaning that for the laws of inheritance, for example, and the laws of Yevamot, it's interesting that it's saying, that possibly if the father does not leave a female, a woman, a daughter, and dies, that the levirate situation is contracted. I never heard that. I was not aware that it had to be a male offspring, but it's possible. I mean, it's a question that I would have to research. Ki ein lo ben, because he has no son. Ha'im haya lo ben. So the implication is that were he to have had a son, lo hayu, the daughters would not have you tov ot klum. They would not have laid claim to anything. They wouldn't have come. Magid shechachmaniot hayu. And this tells you that they were very intelligent. They had studied, they learned, they knew what the law was. So, right, yeah, David.
Yeah, so is the main reason that they're here because they're there to claim inheritance? I mean, is because they talked about father, being wiped out, right? So it wasn't they came mainly for monetary reasons, right? Not because of altruistic reasons, right? Or was it both?
I think it was both. I think it's a lovely. I mean, the way they're asking about it is that they don't want their father's name to basically be blotted out.
Right.
Not going to, because essentially, if they are not entitled to an inheritance, then I believe it goes back to the father's brothers. They would get his inheritance. Okay.
So it's both. Okay.
So, right. So that's it is both. I really think it is. Okay.
Thank you.
Of course. So, Vayakrev Moshe et mishpatan lifnei Hashem. And so Moses brought their case before God. So why? Vayakrev Moshe et mishpatam. Why did Moses bring their case? Nit alma halacha. The law was concealed mimenu, from him. He forgot, or he didn't. He wasn't able to figure out how one would adjudicate this situation. V'kan nifra al shinatal atara, and here he was paid back because he had taken a crown. We'll explain what that means. It's a metaphor here. In other words, he made an assumption about his authority that he had no right to do, but we're going to see what exactly that was. Lomar, as it says, and in the first chapter of Deuteronomy, it says, "V'hadavar asher yikashem or yikshem mikem takrivun elah." He said, and any matter that is too difficult for you. In other words, remember they had lower courts. They had a system of lower courts that worked through the process. And basically he was saying, if none of those courts can figure out a case, bring it to me, assuming that he's going to be able to adjudicate it. But here he couldn't. Davar acher, a different interpretation. Ra'aya haita, Re'uya haita parshazu. It would have made sense for this parsha, this section that we're reading, the hikatev al yedei Moshe, to have been simply one of the laws that Moses would have written down. Normally, it would have made sense for him to have simply written this down. Ela shezachu benot Tzlofchad. But what happened was the daughters of Tzlofchad had this additional merit, menichtava al yadan, and it was through them that this parsha came to be written. In other words, they were the ones who brought this case to Moses to have adjudicated, and consequently, that's why this portion was written into the Torah, because they brought the case itself. And it wasn't simply part of what God dictated to Moses on Mount Sinai, or however that worked out. So, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor, and Hashem said to Moses the following: Cain, David.
Yeah. So is that why you? Okay, I didn't understand at the beginning. You said this was an example of oral Torah in written Torah. So you're saying that this section was not in the original Torah, that basically was written in later. Is that the point?
No. In some ways, I'm saying something very similar to what Rashi just said. I don't know that he would have put it as I did. What I'm saying is that the notion of oral Torah has more to do with applied Torah than whether it was written down or it wasn't written down. It wasn't written down for many, many centuries because it needed to be flexible enough to be able to apply Torah. And eventually it did get written down in the Mishnah, and of course further developed through the Talmud and the academies where they studied these things. But I'm saying that understanding written and oral Torah isn't so much the fact that one was written and the other one was oral. It has to do with the very nature of these particular statements of law. And because this is a practical issue. The law is that the inheritance goes through the male line, but the oral Torah is, well, what happens if a man doesn't leave any sons? What happens then? And so that's the point. And so what happened was that Tzlofchad didn't leave any sons. His daughters cared enough about what was going on, and they brought it to the attention of Moses, etc. And of course, it got written down in the Torah as we're reading right now.
Okay. Because I'm just trying to understand when you said at the beginning an example of oral Torah in written Torah. Yes. So basically, you're saying that's how it got in here was because it was an example of oral Torah, right? I mean, it's the distinction is not written down or oral, but interpretation, right? But because of the interpretation or the circumstance and the interpretation, ultimately it got written down. Is that correct?
Well, I think it happened in the course normally of. I think it's a little more shaded than that, but basically that's what was happening. I think that's the point that Rashi's making, right? That under other circumstances, Moses would have written this thing down. Okay, but here we have an attribution. We have an attribution of this passage to the daughters of Slavchad.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I think it's just a little bit more muted, perhaps.
Okay.
All right. So a little bit more, right? Okay. So God says to Moses, "Came benot Tzlofchad dovrot." Indeed, the daughters of Tzlofchad have spoken the truth. That's how Rashi's going to explain that, and that's the Aramaic. He's going to tell us that Onkelos has the translation. They've spoken. How can I put it? I don't want to say justified, but something like that, right? They have the case. Naton titen lahem, you shall surely give to them achuzat nachala, a portion of an inheritance. Betoch achei avehem, in the midst of their father's brothers. V'havarta et nachalat avihen lahen, and you shall transfer the inheritance of their father to them. And let's take a look at the Rashi here. There's quite a bit. So I am going to mark this in here because we do need to put in a marking. Excuse me. Let's find the place. Okay. Let's find. Let me see if I can find it here. Yes. Cain benot Sofchad Tovrot, right? Indeed, the daughters of Slavchad speak. Ketargumo, just as Onkelos translates it, Yeut, meaning the truth. They have a legitimate case. Kach ketovea parsha zo lefanai bamarom. Right. This is how this. It's interesting. He uses sort of a metaphoric expression. He says, "Indeed, this is the way." That's the kach here. Indeed, this particular section is written before me up in heaven. Right. I mean, because we understand that Torah ultimately comes from a profoundly divine source. And so because God is the cause of everything, right? And God in the sense is behind everything. The notion of this law was already up there in heaven. Magid Shira'ata Einan, and this tells you that their eyes, that is the eyes of the daughters of Tzlochad, saw Ma Shelo Ra'ata Eino Shel Moshe. They saw something that Moses did not see. They did not. They were able to figure this out as to what was right. I'm going to do a little bit, see what I can do, a little bit more of the Rashi here, right? Cain benot Slavchad dovrot, okay? Thus do the daughters of Slavchad speak. Yafeh tabu. They have claimed well. They've made a valid claim. Ashrei ha'adam sha'kadosh baruch hu modeh ledvarav. Happy is the man to whom the Holy One, blessed be He, acknowledges His words. Naton titain, you shall surely give. Shnei chalakim. So the fact that it's two words, right? Two portions. Chelek avihem, you need to distribute amongst them their father's portion. Shaya miyotzei Mitzrayim, because he was one of the people who departed from Egypt. V'chelko im achav benichsei chefer, and also whatever the brothers, that is Tzlofchad and his brothers, would have divided up from their father's estate, that also should go. In other words, their father's portion from their grandfather's estate should also go to them. Ve'evarta, right? And this or ve'ha'avarta, you shall transfer. That's the way I'm going to translate that, right? Excuse me. Lashon Avara, and the other manuscripts, they say Evra. And he says it has a connotation of anger. And it's a reference in Baba Batra, who b'mi she'eno meniach ben liosho. So it's saying that there's a certain anger directed, at least that's the translation that I was reading, to the one who does not leave a son to succeed him, which is, of course, pretty harsh, right? Yeah. Davar acher, another interpretation, al shem shahabat ma'avert. The reason is that the daughter, when the daughter inherits, she transfers nachala, inheritance, mishevet leshevet, from one tribe to another, shebana uva'ala, because her sons and her husband, Yorshin Ota, they inherit her. So if she's, let's say, from the tribe of Ephraim, okay, or Menashe, she's from the tribe of Ephraim of Menashe, and she marries a man from the tribe of Gad and passes on, the inheritance then goes to the tribe of Gad. And that's the transfer involved here. All right, let's see here. Okay. Right. Shelo tisov nachala lo, nitztava ella. Oh, so he says, the reason why is that the law that the inheritance couldn't pass to a different tribe only applied in that generation, or tohadar bilvad, solely that generation. In other words, the daughters of Slavchad, we're going to see later on, forgive me for anticipating, but their tribe comes and makes the claim that they're going to lose territory, because if the daughters of Slavchad marry men from other tribes, that the tribes are going to gain their territory. So the daughters of Slavchad are told not that they can marry whomsoever they like, as long as they're from the same tribe as they are. But that apparently, according to Rashi, according to Baba Batra, only applied in that generation. Subsequent generations, the woman did not have to marry a man from her own tribe. Okay? V'chein v'havartem et nachalato levito. And likewise, it says, that's the sense, that you shall transfer his inheritance to his daughter. V'kulam hu omer, and regarding all of them, he says, the unatatem, he uses the word you shall give, right? He doesn't say v'havarta or v'havartem. Uvevat hu omer, but regarding a woman, hu omer v'havartem, it says you shall transfer. It doesn't use the word you shall give, because subsequently that land is transferred. And this seems like a good place for us to quit today. And yeah, we'll put the marking in here.
So why was that law only applied during that, for that generation?
Good. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's a legitimate question, and I have to tell you, I also wonder about it too. I don't know. I'm sure there's a good answer, but I can't think of it right now. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. So, yeah. Okay.
Maybe it just wasn't as significant subsequently in subsequent generations. So I don't know. I mean, of course, the women would still be aware that it was preferable for them to marry someone from their own tribe. But maybe it's an issue that it wasn't a necessity in the same way, because once the family started, the amount of holding would be far less significant in latter generations than it would be, at least the likelihood of it is pretty much out there, that subsequent generations would not, take away from the holding as much. So I'm going to stop the recording with this.